Um, cool. Well, welcome. This is a session on choosing systems that are right for your church. My name is Nick Lenzi. I'm part of the Small Group Network. I'm a host on the Group Talk podcast. I have a show on there that's called Reading Lens, where we take books, usually business books, leadership books, or also television shows. We did one on Ted Lasso recently. That was a lot of fun to do. But we break down those books and share how they're great, how they influence our leadership, our lives, our small groups. Really trying to take concepts and say like, hey, here's what we're learning here. Here's how we can apply it inside our groups, which is awesome. But today we're going to talk systems, which can be super exciting or super dry, but we're going to try to do my best to make it good for you guys. This was actually, so I have been doing the lobby now. I think this is since 2013. So that means 8 years is how long I've been kind of a part of the Small Group Network and things from there. This session that we're doing today, it was actually my first breakout that I ever attended when I went to the lobby. And it was led by Mark Howell. And I knew I wanted to do this session because every lobby, I always think about the lessons I learned from that first session. And so here's your big takeaway on systems. All right. There is no one size fits all. So there are a lot of systems out there and everyone thinks they have the best system, which is great. By the time you're done, you should hope that you have the best system for your church. Right. But then everyone goes out and shares these systems. And there's things that work in Southern California, and there's things that work in Nevada, and there's things that work in Sri Lanka, and there's things that work in Nashville, and there's things that work in Hoboken, New Jersey. And so a lot of today, what we're going to learn is like, what's going to be best for your context and what are the things that you need to consider. And the biggest part of that is we're going to go through a bunch of like pros and cons with systems and things like that. But ultimately, and this is the one takeaway I want you guys to leave with, pick the one with the problems that you're most willing to deal with. I think that's going to be the thing for much of life that applies beyond small groups is what are the problems that you're willing to deal with? There's not going to be a perfect scenario out there. So I think that's the big thing as we get started that you guys should be aware of. And so I've been leading small groups at my church for 13 years. And we have been a church plant for 14 years. So I started coming when we were at about 20 people. I had originally, I grew up in Pittsburgh, PA. I studied in Philadelphia. I studied finance. So studying finance, naturally, I wanted to work on Wall Street. That was like my big dream. So I ended up getting a job at JP Morgan, came up here to work for Wall Street. Hoboken is nice because there's a subway line that goes right into the financial district. And I learned quite quickly that my dream sucks and that his is better. And so that was kind of the thing that kind of drew me to church. So I did that for 5 years. And I did the groups thing on the side. But along the way, I got to learn a lot of things on how to do groups. And so much of it was from the Small Group Network. My lead pastor was able to take me to a point. And then thankfully, we found the Small Group Network and I was able to find mentors and find other people. And a lot of that came through local huddles that we have, which has been really great to be able to learn more about this. And I think I probably read every single small group that exists. So I don't know if any other readers are out there. You'll hear me often talk about books today or references. Because I've been around for a while too, I know a lot of these individuals too. So if you're ever like, hey, could you put me in touch with this person? I would love to do that as well. So cool. So I'll talk about, so I guess the other thing I need to preface is take into consideration that what works here at Hoboken Grace. So I talked about context, right? What works here at Hoboken Grace isn't necessarily going to work where you are. And I think one of the huge advantages that we had at Hoboken Grace and being a church plant is that we got to establish the DNA of our church. So the more I work with churches, I realize that like sometimes you guys don't always have that great opportunity where you are going to be able to come in and put in a brand new system and overhaul these things. I've watched a lot of small group pastors kind of plan their own funeral by coming into churches and being like, we're done with Sunday school and we're killing all these things off, you know, I won't be the person to tell you that like you should go in and kill off your Sunday school groups or something like that, because maybe that's what works best in your context. What I think the kind of baseline that we all believe in is that these small groups are a community of believers who come together in about 8 to 12, and they are on a common mission trying to accomplish something. So sometimes maybe that looks like a Sunday school, maybe that looks like a small group, maybe that looks like a missional community, or whatever you guys decide to name it. So the first thing that we did when we wanted to start our small groups, we knew when we planted this church that we wanted small groups to be a part of that. But it's one thing to want to have it. It's another thing of where are you going to take these people and what are you going to do with them? So it's kind of thinking of that end goal in mind first. So, the big thing that was motivating us is that we wanted to make sure that people were applying what they were learning. We knew that we were moving into a culture of New York City where we have a highly educated population, right? And while they might not have strong biblical literacy, we know that they are mostly going to be, I don't know what the term is, but they have a college education, right? And therefore, they know how to study. We don't need to spend time teaching them how to study. They already know how to do that, right? These are people who are naturally, when they pick up a Bible and they have questions, they're going to ask them, they're going to research them, they're going to look at all different resources, because college taught them like, hey, here's how you look at all these different references, and this is where you go to find them, and so forth. So, that's one of the things that influenced us. So what we wanted to really focus in on was, how do we help them apply? So James 1:22 was a big part of that. Don't just be hearers of God's word, but this is the Nick Lenzi version, but do what it says. Otherwise, it's like a man who looks in a mirror and forgets who he is, which is a really interesting reference, because I don't know if they even had mirrors back in when that was written, but that's another conversation. But we'll go with that translation, right? So that was a big thing that influenced us. And then, what's interesting is we started to gather, right? We started to have church, and then we were like, all right, we want to have people get into small groups. And so we started asking people, hey, like, would you like to get together this week and we'll have a conversation about what we learned on Sunday? And the thing that we kept hearing over and over and over again was, oh, I don't have the time. 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 And to be fair, like, in here, like, there was a pretty valid excuse for them, right? When I worked at JP Morgan, it was like we showed up at 6 to 7 a.m. and we got home at like 8 p.m. right? Which is insane, but it's just what you do when you're in your 20s and you live in Manhattan, right? You play hard, you party hard, and then you get burnt out and hopefully make it into your 30s, right? But as we're trying to grow this church, we knew we wanted to start to meet people. And when you want to meet people, it's like, oh, hey, do you want to grab coffee? Or, hey, do you want to grab dinner? And when we asked that question, we kept getting, yeah, I'd love to. Like, let's set up a time to meet. And so I don't know who it was. I think we ended up figuring out it was our brilliant pastor's wife who was here, who combined the ideas and was like, hey, what if, so they just changed the question and said, hey, what if we get together over dinner? And continue what we heard on Sunday and share what we've been learning? And we started getting yeses. And so for us, that's how our dinner groups got born. I know a lot of people, like, when they hear about this dinner group concept, they're always like, oh, like, you got it from scripture, and that, like, we need to have meals together and break bread together and all this stuff. And it's like, no, like, I wish it was that, like, like, we got it straight from scripture and then this is how it worked, or that, like, the secret to our success is if we can just get people to have dinner together at our church. It was a reflection of our community. It was what worked in our context. And I think that's the big thing. So be a student of your context and your community. Where are people naturally gathering, and where are their kind of safe places? So for you guys, or not for you guys, for where you live, like, what might that look like? I think about how when I was growing up, my parents had to take me to a lot of practices, and there was a group of parents there. So is it possible that your small groups could just meet at the ball fields, or the soccer matches, or those kind of things where they're naturally gathering and they're just bored to death, right? Or are they gathering at parks, or are they gathering at community centers? Like, what is those safe places for them to meet? And rather than them trying to come to us, we're trying to go to them with that. So that's pretty much like the structure of like how dinner groups sort of came to be. But along that way, like, we started to consider, all right, so we talked about like the application and how we wanted people to grow in that aspect. So we then needed to consider, what is it that we want them to learn? And then you start getting faced with like, well, do you want to study books? Do you want to strictly study the Bible? Do you want to, do you just need them to find friends? I know that's a big common thing in different areas. For us, that had a little bit of influence for us because we had people coming from all over the country. Our church is usually about 80% of them have family that live more than an hour away. And so like, this is their family. So like, these are things to consider as you're trying to say that, or sorry, as you're trying to consider these things. And for us, like, I think part of the thing with the books as well was we is a very transient area. So new people are coming in all the time, new people are leaving. And so the books became really challenging for us, because if we did a book, it was likely that someone would come to church and a group would already be in their 8th week. And so it's like, it's not the most welcoming thing for someone to step into a group and say like, hey, we're reading this book, we're on chapter 8. So by Monday, if you could order this book off Amazon and just read the first 7 chapters, you'll catch up quickly. Like, you'll be able to jump in right away. So think about like, how are people going to assimilate into these groups? Maybe you have an environment where you can close those groups, right? Where you can kind of protect that, and the people that are on board and they're ready to go. But you need to think of the rhythms of the life of the people inside of your group. So for us, one of the things that we do differently is that our groups kind of meet for an entire year. And it goes back to that concept of, this is their family here. And so it's really difficult for me to tell them like, hey, it's the summer, we should stop, right? Because in essence, what I'm telling them is, stop meeting with your family. And but the opposite might be true where you are, where it's like, no, they have a family, right? And when it gets to the summer, it's way too hard to pull off childcare. There's so many vacations going on. There's all these things, and then so these are the things that you want to take into consideration is how do people gather? How do they, what are their natural rhythms in life? How can we line up with that? I think that's why so many of us will start our groups when it gets close to the regular kind of school season, and try to match those natural rhythms that go inside that. Cool. And then I think one of the other things that we've learned along the way, by the way, we're going to get to Q&A towards the end. I realize I have a lot of talking points and I've hogged the mic out here a lot, but we will get there. I think one of the other things that's super important, and I'll be honest, I think I kind of backed into this one more than I, planned it going forward, is that I think it's really important for groups to be balanced in what they do. So a lot of this is going to come from my influence in working with Steve Gladen at Saddleback. And they have a thing called 5 purposes. If you don't know them, the 5 purposes are worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and evangelism. Your church may define that differently, but when we think about the life of a Christian, there's really like 5 areas of growth that we see inside them that we're trying to help them with. And more often than not, I think one of the times where systems can go, where systems kind of can stall out, is when they try to focus on just one of those purposes. Like, I really think it will help you and help your ministry if you can balance out all 5 of those. So sometimes what I see is that like, so something that might most replicate a group that's just doing worship would potentially be a prayer group, and a fellowship group, a group that's just meeting to get together and fellowship together. That might be an affinity group where they get together and they're just playing volleyball each week, or they're a knitting group, or there's something. And then, casually life conversation sort of happens inside of that. Discipleship, in my opinion, might be a Bible study or a given study that happens. Ministry would be where like the team that you serve with on Sunday, or the team that you serve with during the week, that ends up being your group, right? And we're on this common mission together where we are the parking lot greeters. And after we're done with our parking lot greeters, we go out and we do brunch together. And then the last one is evangelism. Sometimes this is modernly talked about as missional communities where, hey, we're going to go and we're going to meet somewhere special and we're going to invite our neighbors to be a part of that. And it's just focused on that. Each one of those groups are great, right? I think there's two ways that you can kind of look at this. So one thing that I've experienced with these different types of groups is I think that because if you don't have balance and it's just one of these, I think that you're going to run into where things kind of stall or they get dry after like 6 to 9 months, right? And I think a lot of it's because, all right, I've risen this, like I've strengthened in this area, and I need to increase something else. And so maybe one of the ways that you combat this is maybe you do have all 5 of these group types, but you have like a semester system where they're able to switch between them and they're able to go to the one that they need at this given time, right? So maybe it's like, all right, I really need to learn how to grow and worshiping God or praying. And so I'm going to join this prayer group for 10 weeks, right? And maybe that's what that looks like. Or it's thinking through like, how do I build in all of these elements into my group, right? With that. So those are different types of groups that happen. I think another one that's like super popular right now as well. Actually, it's not right now. I think it's been for like several years. Who knows how long it's been? But sermon based is super popular right now, and it's got some pros and cons with that. We're going to get to some of those pros and cons a little bit later, but I would say like the thing that then gets challenging with sermon based is your preaching schedule that your pastor has. Does it include in all those different things that you're trying to grow an individual in? Is it timely, right, with those kind of steps as well? That goes along with it too. So having alignment with your church and your senior pastor is super important when it comes to this system that you're going to establish. But one of the best pros of sermon based though is it's one of the cheapest to get going, right? It's easy for assimilation because all they have to do is hear that message. And in this day and age, it's so easy to hear it. If you weren't there on Sunday, I mean, all of us have podcasts, all of us have YouTube, or we have that friend who just takes phenomenal notes, right? Sometimes we lean into that group member that just like, that Davis is coming in with a page full of notes that's going to be almost as good as the sermon itself. So things to consider in there. So for us in our personal experience, so I would describe our model as like a sermon-based hybrid, and stick with me here for a second. So we started this church. We knew we wanted to have groups. We ended up realizing, all right, dinner groups is going to be our sweet spot. We're a church plant, which means we're broke, right? So we're going to do our best to do sermon-based questions. We're going to come up with about 5 questions out of each sermon. And the last one is going to be one that's applicationable that they can really try to live out inside of that. And that worked great for a couple of years. And then we started to see like some things getting stale and things getting stale inside of that. So naturally, we started creating some tools for our group leaders to start using, some like experience plans and spiritual growth guides and these different things to go with it. And one of the things that we kept observing is that we would give them these tools, right? And they would wear them in this like hypothetical group leader backpack, right? And that backpack just kept getting heavier and heavier and heavier, but they weren't actually using those tools. And so it caused us to like stop and think. And so I think this is another thing that I would wrestle with through when you're thinking about your system is, all right, over the course of a month, what is it, the things that you want to see your groups accomplish, right? And for us, it ended up being four things. And I think it's kind of like the five purposes and they fit into four in a way. But for us, it was connecting, communion, common growth, and personal growth. And I apologize to those people who realized that we couldn't come up with a fourth C, and we didn't have, and it's also, we got CCP, which if, sometimes that's also not great. Anyways, bad joke. But, so connecting is a night where, it really is a night designed where they can invite their friends to be a part of group. We like to talk about it as friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors, who are those people that you're really trying to impact. So it's ways that your group can be inclusive. And so they do this by hosting different events. We really try to get them outside of their homes and get them into the community to do that. The next one is communion. Communion the word just means the act of sharing. And so these are nights where they're going to get the opportunity to share about themselves and what they're learning. Or so these are nights, maybe they're going to do prayer for an extended period of time, or they're going to worship together. This is a great night to do devotionals or share their testimonies. It's really great. Like once you get done with testimonies, I've have them switch over to devotionals. And what's cool about that is like our group members sometimes don't understand that they know and experience the word more than they think. And so I just give them a simple prompt, which is, I did this with my group and it was phenomenal. And it was just, hey, share with us a time that was challenging in your life, and what was a piece of scripture that got you through that? Okay. So it's just a way they can continue with that. And then the next one that's maybe the most common one is common growth. So common growth is the weekly questions that sermon based, right? So this is the one that they're going to fall back on when they get there. But so maybe we're in a series right now and it's on relationships. And so we might be in a different place on our spiritual journey, but it's an area of our life where we can all take a step together and encourage one another. And then the last one is personal growth. And this is like, where are we at in our own spiritual walk? And how can we encourage each other inside that as well? So what's cool about it is that a lot of the other areas, like, a lot of the others may take like 15 or 30 minutes. So it still gives them time to do questions, but it's been really good for them to know, like, okay, here are the different nights that I can do that. And if you want to see that model in more detail, you just go to dinnergroupleader.com is where I just keep all that stuff. You can feel free, if you see something that might be missing on there or a file looks old, like just hit me up and I'll try to help you guys out with that. So, yeah. So, I think I hit all of them. So things to consider, whether you want to be open or closed. Here's a great one. So another thing to kind of consider when you're thinking about your systems as well is, what do you need your leaders to do? I think is super important. I think that'll influence your structure a lot. So, you heard me talk about earlier about how, your culture kind of determines a little bit of who might your teachers or your leaders might be, right? And so let's say that you live really close to a seminary and you have a lot of seminary students that are around. Like, you might be in an area where you can get away with having them teach more. But if you're in another area where like they just don't know that much, you may need to lean into more of, all right, I need to take the teaching away from them. I'm just going to show them a video, or I'm going to have them read a book, or I'm going to have them do those kind of things. Or it may just be that your senior leadership is just not comfortable with them, putting it in their hands in a sense. So be thinking through those things. Like, what is it that I need them to do? Do I need them to be a facilitator? Do I need them to be a strong connector? Do I need them to be a teacher? Do I need them? So all of those different kind of roles, I think that each system kind of plays to the strength of the leader, which is a big part of that. And then, what do your groups value? I think is another thing that's super important. So for us, we got ours from, there's a church in Chicago called Christian Community Church. Realize it's a really basic name. Dave Ferguson is the lead pastor of that, but I think their groups hit it out of the park. And so we just kind of borrowed from them, but it's connect the unconnected, help people take their next steps, and reproduce groups and leaders. And it's interesting how those values then have really influenced our groups. And I would say that what you value is kind of where your boundaries are with your group. So as long as a group is hitting out of the park with those three values that I just shared, connect the unconnected, help people take next steps, reproduce groups and leaders, it's more likely that I'm going to be hands off with that group leader, right? Because they're being successful. And if they're not accomplishing those things, that's where I'm going to step in and be like, hey, like, I don't know if this can be a group or not. That goes with that. And then last thing is, how are you going to connect people into your groups? So this is another important thing to be thinking through. Are you going to do that through online signups? Are you going to do that through an event? Is the host or the leader going to be responsible for filling their group? I know some of us like, we reach a max of us being able to be match.com of like, let me find a group for you. Right. After a while that gets really challenging. So these are all things to consider. So, I'll open it up now for questions that you guys may have of each other or us or, just systems in general.
Can you repeat the three values again?
Oh, yeah, no problem. It's connect the unconnected, reproduce groups and leaders, and help people take their next step. And I think it's important to point out it's reproduce groups and leaders and not reproduce groups and group leaders. I have a lot of groups that feel like they're failing because they can't find someone to start the next group. And yet their group is filled with people who are killing it in kids ministry and they're leading first impressions and all these different areas. And it's just like, you helped these people thrive and become leaders. Like that's a huge win. So, cool. Two Adams, did you guys have something? No, it's okay. I wasn't sure because your mic like came on, but.
Yeah, no, it's great, helpful. I love, we have 4 identities. You talked about the purposes.
Yes.
The 5 purposes, we have 4 identities. So we're just talking, I love the concept of keeping it simple each month or each quarter, but like what you're actually focusing on and doing and the expectation for your groups and whatnot. Because I'd say we're kind of a hybrid sermon-based system as well. So yeah, the tools, not like you're talking about the pack on leaders' backs, it's like, are people actually using this? We're going through busy work of producing stuff, but is it actually helpful to what our leaders and groups really do?
Yeah.
And so I think that's super helpful in terms of that tweaking the system that works for you where you're at. So I just appreciate that. And that rings true for where we are. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, Adam. That just triggered me to think of, another thing to think through is like, how are you going to start these groups and train them? So another website that we have that you guys are free to check out and pillage anything that you want from it is 10weekgroup.com is the other one. And so we start with 10-week groups, and the plan for those 10-week groups when they get started is a couple different things. So the biggest thing of them all is giving the new leader a lot of structure before they get started. So they don't have to do a lot of the planning. Like those first 10 weeks, they can just plan on executing, right? And so we lay out their first 10 weeks and allow them to just execute the plan. But inside of it, one of the things, this is brilliant. I learned this from my friend Tommy, and we do a phenomenal job of teaching group leaders how to be group leaders, how to be coaches. We don't necessarily teach group members how to be good group members. And so sometimes they may be coming from wherever. It could be they're coming from another church or they're coming from no church at all. But everyone sort of comes into group with some sort of expectation. And one of the nice things about this 10weekgroup.com and the videos that we have on there is we're trying to help them understand what a group is and what a group's going to accomplish. And I think the leader really appreciates it because they no longer have to try to teach those kind of principles or like help people understand like this is what a group does. It's, they can hear it from our lead pastor and some of our other staff members as to what a group kind of looks like and how they that kind of expected behavior. I realize that might sound really kind of strict or silly, but it's been super helpful. And then I think one of the bonuses of that, how groups get started too with 10 weeks is it allows the group to figure out whether they have chemistry or not. So if they don't have chemistry, it gives them a good exit and realize like, all right, we got to start over and we'll just do another 10-week kind of cycle. Sometimes you don't know whether this leader is going to cut it or not. And 10 weeks is a great way to see whether you have a leader that is in alignment or not. I'll be honest, I've only ever had to remove like one for that. So it's not one that really comes up a lot. And then ultimately, it's also a good recruiting tool because it's like, hey, look, I just need you to execute this plan. And it allows you to know if this is the right fit for you. And if you get to the end of this 10 weeks, and even if you are killing it and you're like, this isn't for me, like I'm going to support you in that and help you step away. Usually when they're killing it, there's someone else in the group that will easily can keep it going. And that person will want to stay in that group as well. So yeah. So thanks for Adams for triggering that as well.
So Nick,
go ahead, Amy.
Just a clarifying question on that. Are you saying that you use the 10weekgroup.com? Is that when a brand new group starts, is that like the first curriculum that they go through? And then at that point, they have some flexibility to what to do from there? Is that what you do?
Yeah. So one of the other things about 10weekgroup.com is I'm hoping it's teaching the leaders how to set up their own kind of structure. And I think the thing I'm learning is that I may just need to make a track for them that like, if you're someone who doesn't want to plan out like what your group looks like, I may just do it for them. So they have the option of like, I'd rather just be in this Tesla that's going to drive me to the place. Right. Like, I don't mind like being in this seat and helping other people feel comfortable in this car and stuff like that. But like, could you take care of where we're going? And then you have the other people who are like, no, I love the thrill and control of driving. And I want to make sure I go past these sites on the way. But you ultimately know the destination that they're going to. So does that help out, Amy, in thinking through that? Yeah. So, cool.
I just had a quick question. So, your group objectives, right? Connect the unconnected. I can't remember the second one.
Help people take the next steps.
Help people take the next steps, and then grow groups and leaders. Reproduce groups and leaders. Can you talk a little bit about like your journey? Like, how did you get there? I love that. It's clear, it's simple, but how did you arrive and say, okay, this is what we actually want to measure. This is what we're actually going to judge our group health by, and then as well, like, what does an intervention look like when you say like, hey, how are we going to address? Hey, you guys are crushing in these two areas. I'm concerned in this area. So like, how did you get there? And then what is it like an intervention? How does that conversation go? Or like, what strategies do you have for growing one of those metrics?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think we fell in love with the phrase, right? But I think all of us, usually when we try to think, what do we want our groups to do? I feel like a lot of us will always fall into connect, grow, and go, in a sense, is another way I've kind of heard it. Or if you think what's the other one? Love God, love others, and multiply. Or North Points is like influence with outsiders, connection with insiders, and something. I should know this better. I'm actually a North Point partner, so I really should know this one. But usually there's something that kind of helps guide them inside that. And so and it's also Great Commission, Great Commandment, right? Is I think where that kind of fits in there as well, of like, hey, we want to help others know who Jesus is. And inside of that, like, we want to encourage each other to grow. And then the last one, but we just don't want to share this for ourselves. And so I think when it comes to like the conflict, one of the principles that we always really fall back on and I think this applies to any kind of like time we need to confront something, is we have this model called OIC. So it's observation, interpretation, and clarification. So anytime you run into a disagreement, these are how we do them. So observation, like, hey, I've noticed that your group has been the same 12 members for 3 years. I don't know if this is because you have tried to connect people and you haven't been successful, or maybe you have group members that are turning people away, and then this is the third one, is you should write this one down. I use it all the time. Or maybe it's something else I'm unaware of, because it just covers everything, right? And then clarification is just simple, like, could you clarify for me? And so that's the approach I would use inside of, so I just use the one for like connecting and connected, right? I would probably say that's the most common one, right? The connecting and connected. And I think sometimes it's hard for them to understand. There's a tension that all groups need to address, which is intimacy versus inclusion. So you need your group to be intimate so that, you know, they know each other well and they feel comfortable sharing with each other and stuff like that. At the same time, they need to be inclusive, right? New people need to come in. For me, I always call like new people to the group is oxygen to the group. You know, really, it provides a lot to that. But if you're way too focused on inclusion, there's no intimacy getting built. There's no kind of serious discussion that's happened. It doesn't really matter if you're there or not. And then on the other side, if you're way too focused on intimacy, I think you're missing out on the mission of God and what he's kind of asking for us. But I think the most beautiful way that I've heard it's Rick Howerton, who used to work at Lifeway and Nav Press. And now I think he's leading groups in Texas at his son's church, which is, I hope that happens to me someday. I hope I get to go retire and lead groups at my son's church. That'd be phenomenal. But he told me, you know, small groups are like families, right? And do I ever want to split or break up a family? No. But eventually the kids grow up and they turn 18 and it's time to leave the house and for them to go start their own family. And so I found that's been a really helpful way of talking to groups that kind of get stuck and they're like, no, this is my people. This is what works for us. And like those kind of things. So I think that's really important to think about as well. You know, and how we communicate that. So hope that helps.
That's really good.
Yeah. Make sure you credit Rick on that one and not me. So, but although I've shared it enough now, I'm sure Rick would be like, no, you own it, but it's cool. Cool. Any other questions?
I'm a little bit confused with the connect, communion, common growth, and personal growth. How do you work it out within a group? How do you make it work?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think like I said, if you go to that 10weekgroup.com, you'll see how like we lay it out in different weeks. And so like for me and my own group, the first week of every month, I'm going to do personal growth, right? It's going to be an opportunity for us to check in and see how we're doing in our own personal growth. You know, we have this thing called an experience plan, which you can see there too. And the experience plan, what's nice about it is it's just like any other spiritual habits kind of sheet. And so it's like, how are you attempting to experience God this month? And what I usually find is like when you're able to check in on once a month, you're going to have one dude in your group or one girl in your group who's just like crushing it. And everyone else in the group is going to be able to tell there's something different about that person. And then they're going to be able to share like, hey, here's what I've been doing. And it then becomes infectious and other people in the group really start saying like, oh, like I should take this more serious. And you do it the second month and you start seeing more and more people. And it's also an opportunity when people get stuck. So sometimes they'll come into it and be like, I want to spend 60 minutes every day in the Word. And it's just like, wow, like that's really awesome. And they'll crush it for like 2-3 days and then they'll be done. Right. And if they would just like learn like, okay, like let's start with 5 minutes and then let's start with 10 minutes. And let's, you know, and grow it that kind of way. So that's the first month or the first week of the month. And then the next week, I'll probably do our common growth kind of questions and check in on the sermon series that we're currently doing and using those questions. The following week, I'll have a week for us to do some sort of communion activity. So maybe, this month, what we're doing, we have local elections that are coming up. And so we're just going to be praying for our city and just, helping make sure that there's peace here and things like that. And then the final week, we're going to do an event together. So we're going to go, hopefully this doesn't sound blasphemous, we're going to go hang out at a bar. And unfortunately in Hoboken, that's all we have here. We don't have Paneras. We just have bars. So it's a great opportunity for us to invite our coworkers or neighbors, because it's usually the space that they feel comfortable in. I think that's probably one thing that Friends really gets right. Look at how much they're hanging out in their local cafe. Because unlike Friends, we don't have these huge apartments. We have little ones that squeeze us into, like, I think it's more comfortable to go to this coffee shop and talk as opposed to staying in our apartments. So, so I would say, like, that's how, it's trying to balance those things out. And for me, like, I really try to coach our leaders to be intentional with, like, kind of having a plan. But like I shared earlier, like, they're not all super structured type A like me, where this comes naturally. And so I think I may have to start giving them more guided tracks as to, like, here's how to incorporate these elements in your group more. So
you mentioned early on in the discussion about existing DNA or existing church.
Yeah.
What, as you've done consulting, what are some of the key things if you were an existing church, let's say since the 1970s?
Yeah.
If you were going to reimagine a new system, what are some of the few key things that you would say are important in developing a plan and getting people on board to do that?
Yeah. So I'll first admit, I don't have much experience with this. All right. So take everything with a grain of salt. I don't actually have, like, tangible experience, but doesn't mean, like, how would I approach it? Right. So one of the other things is I would, Alan White is a guy who's really great at this scenario. He's got an awesome blog. He's got great books. He's got a podcast I'd highly recommend as well. But one of the things I got to, go through his coaching, and some of the other ones were through that. And some of the things that I learned through that is you can't go in with this expectation that you're going to win them over immediately.
Yeah.
And so you need to find ways that you're going to be able to sort of attract them to what you're doing. And so what's most likely going to look like is you're going to let them continue being and doing what's working for them. And you're just going to start fresh with new people. Right. And when they start seeing the life change that's happening in these other groups that you have going on, or the trainings that you're doing, those kind of things, that's when they start, coming to you and going through that. Which in my opinion brings up, like, another kind of thing that I think's really important to us here at Hoboken Grace. So I don't think I'm gonna be able to tell the full story. So if you want to hear the full thing, my lead pastor and I did a whole podcast on this, on that Reading Lens. So if you do Reading Lens, and I think it's E-Myth, so E-Myth, it's from March of this year, but we kind of explain this. So one of the other things I think is important is that what you're communicating from stage should be what they're kind of experiencing inside of group. So be cautious as to, like, how you're communicating group. And if it's not what they're getting when they get there, like, you really need to take into consideration, like, what you're communicating. And so what I mean by that is, like, we try to make sure, like, that our groups that are public and open to the public are doing what we're asking groups to do. So if I was in this old church, one of the things I might try to consider doing is, like, hey, like, the groups that we're promoting, like, they are agreeing to do X, Y, and Z with us with the church. Right. So if you have this old group, they've been together for 25 years and they're just happy doing these things, like, it comes with like, these resources aren't necessarily going to be available to you, or like, we're not going to give you platform and airtime just because like you need this. So I think that's kind of like the trade-off inside of that. So like one of the things that, maybe this sounds blasphemous. I want our groups to be, you got to understand I'm from the business world as well. So a lot of my kind of business terms, but I want our groups to be like franchises, in that like when you go to Starbucks, you know what you're going to expect or what it's going to taste like, or those kind of things, no matter whether you're in Sri Lanka or whether you are here or whether you are in Costa Rica, like they all kind of have that same feel. But I do want them to be kind of like, not necessarily like where every group looks the same. Obviously, they're all going to have their own personality, but they're going to be doing those basic things: connecting the unconnected, helping people take next steps, reproduce groups and leaders. So what I don't want is that like, we're communicating from stage, hey, this is where you're going to grow authentically and you're going to build relationships. And then you go to a group and it's like, they just get together and watch Monday Night Football. Like that's not accomplishing the mission that we're trying to do. By the way, that's my own story. That's when I started leading a group, I just started watching Monday Night Football with my guys, and I took a group of 12 down to 4 until I realized, like, oh, I probably shouldn't do this. Like, I shouldn't be ashamed that people actually want to grow in their relationship with Jesus, because they could just go down the street at a bar and watch this if they wanted to. So yeah, I think those are important things to think about. And I think if I had to go to a church where where the culture was already established, I think it's kind of thinking about like, you're giving away a lot of your platform, and I think there needs to be a trade-off inside that when they have the platform of the church.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's why it's also important to consider too. I know a lot of churches will also, like the leader can pick out and lead anything they want. Like they just care that people are getting together. I would be really cautious about that too. Like, yeah. I think having an agenda for your people of what you want them to do, I think is important too, but that's the system that you choose. Maybe you just need them to get together, and it's something that helps build community. I just would think of the trade-offs that are coming with it and the problems that you want to deal with. So
would it be kind of counter, if you have different systems in one given church, where you've got, like different franchises in a church, because you have different people who like to connect differently?
I think that's going to really depend on the culture of your church. And I would also probably say maybe the size of it as well. I could be completely wrong about this, because I was talking about earlier how like maybe you can do a semester approach at your church and have these different kind of groups that specialize in those different kind of purposes. And maybe that works for you. The problem with that is then you're trusting your people to know what their weakness is or what they're trying to balance out. Right. So it's something that you're going to have to wrestle through. I realize this answer stinks. It's something you're going to have to wrestle through as to like it can work and sometimes it can work against you. So
like you're saying, you talk about some groups, some franchises, like the word you would use.
Yeah.
Would be more into being intimate. Yeah. Whereas some franchises would be for inclusion, where you want to go out and evangelize and,
Yeah.
So the guys who want to go evangelize, let them go. Those groups, they evangelize the disciple, they keep producing.
Yeah. So I mean, that does happen in our church, where we have groups that want to, want to do their own thing. They want to study something that, we don't necessarily agree with. I don't want to stop them meeting as a group, but at the same time, I don't want to send people to that like publicly. Like, sure, they can invite people to be a part of that, but I just don't want them to use the church's platform in order to like grow their own ministry, if that makes sense. Right. Is something I want to be cautious about. So does that make sense?
I'm not talking about letting them build their own ministry, but you give them maybe 5 avenues and
Yep. Yeah, I know. I do think that would work. I think the challenge with that then is like, how does that transfer to when you have to train and develop these leaders, does that mean that you have to come up with 5 different kind of focuses in order to be able to train them? Or do they or are you just going to teach them kind of core concepts and they'll apply to all 5 of those? Does that make sense? In that, if you have 5 different ministry types, if I'm going to teach someone who's leading a prayer study different than, or a prayer group different than I'm going to train someone who's doing evangelism group. So
but maybe in a bigger church, you have people who have different stages of the spiritual growth as well.
Yeah.
And the newer guys might be more into evangelism, or it depends who you are.
Yeah. So cool. Well, it is 2:30 and I don't want to rob you guys from, we have another Dr. Why am I blanking on his name? Dave Alford. Dave is phenomenal. I always really enjoy his sessions at the lobby. But hey, if you guys have more questions, again, it's nick@hobokengrace.com or nick@smallgroupnetwork.com. I would love to try to help you guys out as much as possible. So many people have done that for me. And so I'm you've heard those names of people I've kind of, have built me up. I would love to do the same for you guys. So enjoy the next session. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Nick.
Email on the chat, please.